I'm not sad about not wrestling. You shouldn't be sad about the fact that you're not going to see me out here.
You're listening to Binnall of America Audio.
You should rejoice in the fact that I have had the greatest wrestling career in the history of pro wrestling. Woo! Woo!
Seems like, from what I could gather in the book from the kids and stuff with it, that after a while the novelty of all these things, since they were never even brought up with it in the first place, it's not really hard to give up, and the novelty kind of wears off after a while too.
That's one thing. The other thing is they know they can hack it within the community. That they've been brought up that way. They know what it takes. It's not as if you or I were to go into the community and would say, "Oh my God, you know, I'm on email withdrawal."
Yeah.
You know, I can't do this. What am I going to do without my fix of audio cast or things like that? And, you know, and I'm going to miss CSI and I'm going to do...
Yeah, I couldn't give up the Red Sox.
All those things, right. You know, and you know, I really like this single malt scotch here, and I'm not going to make enough money to afford it. Okay. But the Amish kids are saying, well, you know, we know how to do this. We've done it all our lives. This is very congruent with our inner selves, of who we are, who we think of ourselves. There's also a basic difference in the way that we're brought up on the outside and they're brought up on the inside. It shows up in the schools. First of all, the Amish don't want the kids going to school past the 8th grade, because if they do, they might get, you know, ideas that are contrary to the ones that are being promulgated within the sect. And that might give them, in turn, you know, notions of that there is a reasonable, good, interesting life outside the Amish sect. We don't want them to have that. But beyond that, the purpose of the education is different. You grow up in an American school system, public school system, or even a private school system, other than a deeply religious one. The idea is to become an interesting individual, able to support yourself, and go out and be all you can be. The idea in an Amish school is not that. The idea in an Amish school is, how am I going to serve the community? How am I going to integrate within that community? And how is the community of fellow believing souls going to advance towards a greater life in heaven? That's a very, very different way of growing up.
Yeah.
So you don't think I'm going to be an Einstein or I'm going to be a Mick Jagger or anything like that. You don't have those goals. And not having them is a perfectly good reason for going back into the sect and saying, okay, I'm going to be a terrific community member.
Yeah.
And by the way, it doesn't keep everybody down in all ways. I mean, you know, I personally know 3 Amish millionaires, for example, and there are plenty more that I don't know. And you know, their talent would have been recognized as for making money anywhere, to whatever they touched. And I know a very fine Amish artist. There are very few of those because it's kind of difficult to do within the confines of the sect. But most of the people who want to be artists, or who want to be rock stars, or who want to be whatever, who want to go to medical school, who want to open a pharmacy, who want to open an accounting business, or be a lawyer, or be anything that requires a certain amount of higher education and expertise, are not able to stay within the sect.
How long can somebody wait when they're in the Rumspringa before they become baptized? Like,
There's no finite limit on it. I mean, but there gets to be a realistic limit. You get to be about in your mid-20s, and your parents are saying, you know, crap or get off the pot, will you please? You know, we like having you around, but in fact, you haven't found a mate, you haven't found a this or this, so why don't you just get yourself baptized? You know, you're around here anyway. You want to be here. If you don't want to be here, then you're gone. We know. But as long as you're sort of hanging around, you know, and here you are 25 and you're hitting on girls who are 16, you know, find one or just get yourself baptized anyway, and then so you'll bring this other person back in.
And you kind of already touched on it, but it sounds like when somebody's not baptized, they're not like they're not shunned in the classic sense of the Amish way, right?
The shunning is something where most outsiders think, oh, if you haven't become Amish, that they shun you, which is not the case. The shunning is relegated to those people who have decided to be baptized and then decided that they want to leave the sect, then they're shunned. And you can't eat at the table with them, you can't have any interaction with them. This becomes hugely problematic for kids, and sometimes even you find that a husband or a wife has decided to leave the sect and the other one doesn't want to. It becomes hugely difficult. I know one case of something where the man was thrown out because he put in a telephone for his business. This was many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And his wife, who did not want to leave the sect, was forced to leave with him because, that's who she had agreed to spend her life with. She wasn't going to separate from him. Certainly there's no divorce in Amishdom. And so she very reluctantly left the sect and had regretted it ever since. But not that she had a choice in the matter, but that it was painful for her.
In referencing that story, one thing I found interesting about that story that you tell in the book that you're talking about right now is that then somewhere down the line they changed the rules and made it okay to have a phone, but still didn't unban the people.
That's right, yeah. Kind of hard to undo the unbanning.
And I thought it was kind of interesting, too. It's only sort of alluded to in the book, is that just the high level of gossip, it seems, in the community, and sort of like people watching each other and making sure that they're following the rules. It sounds very like, I think that would drive me nuts.
This is real busybody stuff, I mean, part of the way, listen, if I have to undergo all this stuff, I have to wear the pins in my dress in a particular order, you better be darn sure that if I see your pins out of order, I'm gonna say something.
Yeah.
But, it's part of the way that you internalize rules in your community, whatever that is, and express how you believe other people ought to be living.
And it really, the banning sounded like it had a tremendous effect on one of the girls' profile in the book. Says she was so isolated and everything that she ended up trying to commit suicide or something. So, I mean, this is serious business.
This is serious business. It's very, very emotional, and it's almost hard for us as outsiders because we don't have an analogous thing that happens to us, to imagine what it means to be shunned by people who are your family, your only family, who've been your friends all your lives. How can they turn their back on you? Well, the rules require them to turn their back on you. They don't do it because they feel like it. They do it because they're required to do that, and it may hurt them too. This is the toughest thing. But the Amish elders will say to you, look, we don't do this easily. We usually give people 3 and 4 chances, and we do it because it's necessary to the health of the sect. Once we start loosening the rules, then we're going to lose our identity as a people.
Yeah.
We're going to intermarry with others who are not like us, and slowly we'll lose the essence of our religiosity and our specialness. We don't want to do that.
Yeah, that sort of thing's not allowed, right? I couldn't go find an Amish girl and marry her.
You could, but she'd have to leave the sect.
Ah.
I mean, this is what's happened. What the American Jews have said. Okay, well, it's okay. You marry this young lady who's not quite as religious as you are, and then the next generation marries somebody who's completely outside the Jewish faith, and all of a sudden, that family is gone from the world. It may take 2 or 3 generations, but it happens.
Yeah.
And the Amish don't want to allow that to happen, and they have these rules to prevent it from happening. If you want to go, fine, you can go out and go. We'll survive because the other 6 of your brothers and sisters are all going to stay here.
Yeah.
So you'll be out there and you'll be on your own, and we'll still love you, but we won't love you in the same way. And you can love us and all of that, but you're really going to have to find another support system. So that people who go out are, in a certain sense, very, very courageous, because it's tough to exist outside by yourself.
Yeah.
And after all, when they're going out with a very different set of strengths than those of us in the mainstream have. First of all, in economic terms, they've got no training. They've left school at age 14 or 15. They've got no experience in stuff where the big bucks are usually paid. They've got no capital, and they don't even know what's out there.
Yeah.
So these are three very big problems for them. No education, no capital, and no sense of what the resources are. And then the fourth one is this no support system. I mean, they don't even know who's in the next locker at the YMCA who might be of help to them. They don't do networking, and certainly not outside the set.
Yeah.
Because they don't use tools that would allow them to do that. They don't join clubs. Who's on the ball team with them, those sorts of things. The way we all find out what's available, what's there. Here's an interesting young lady you might want to go out with, and listen, there's a job in your field in San Francisco. They don't have these sorts of incoming ideas. For an Amish kid to leave the sect is really an act of courage.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It would be pretty tough to do that sort of thing, especially they're really handicapped going into the world like that. And you kind of already touched on them. So you think those are sort of the big reasons why these kids end up going back to the Amish, the 80%?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of non-negative. In other words, I don't want to fail outside. I don't want to have a job that is going to be awful. I don't want to lose my family. And there's not a heck of a lot pulling them outside, except things that we sometimes take for granted. Satisfying our curiosity about life, intellectually, emotionally, just in terms of sensual experience. They don't have those yearnings because they don't have experience through other people's tales of what those experiences might be.
Yeah.
They're not going to read something about the South Seas and say, boy, I really wish I could see what Tahiti looks like. And, I'd like to take my surfboard out there and see what I can do there. They don't have a surfboard. They haven't watched a movie about other people having surfboards. So these are sort of dreams are circumscribed.
Yeah.
They have some vaguely materialistic dreams, but they're not big deal things. Nobody goes out there and says, I've got $1 million idea. I'm going to start a company that's doing things on the internet from my cousin's garage. I mean, this is not. How can you do that if you have no sense of what the internet is?
Yeah, exactly.
There are all sorts of things that are not out there and available, and this is constraining. So the idea that the kids do go out, they try to experience the world, and it's sort of a real lesson for us. How do we experience the world? What do we do when we get loose? Do we go out and get wrecked? Or do we go out and get things that we have not been able to get otherwise? And one hopes that it's some more of the latter than the former. The college, in addition to being a time to learning how to drink, is also a place to expand your mind and learn about things that you never thought you knew before. You never even experienced it. One guy read the book and said, yeah, the rest of us have a rum spring. It's called college.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Talking about sort of that mixing between the Amish and the English and how they really don't want that sort of thing going on, you do talk about in the book how the decline of farming in the Amish community is leading to that mixing between the Amish and the English, because a lot of the Amish have to go and get jobs in regular mainstream places.
Sure. There are just as many Amish farmers as there always were, but the percentage of the Amish who are involved in farming is lower. And continuing to lower, simply because they can't simply just add farms. However, they have in some senses, because they're now in 26, 27 states, and a lot of them are in isolated, mostly farming communities. But within the established communities, in Lancaster, along Route 80 in Indiana, and down near Worcester and in Ohio, where the big communities are, there's limited farmland. It's been cut up so many times for so many generations. So they've got to take other jobs. And all these RV factories out in Indiana, they love the Amish. Boy, they're great workers. They come on. They don't get sick. They don't take holidays. They don't stop at the dock, to drop in a hat when the clock punch is done. They'll do any job. They're great employees. And they're there, and the Amish say, hey, this is marvelous, terrific money, $18, $20 an hour, and bring it home, and it goes a lot further for us than it does with people who've got to pay the car bills and the tuition bills and the insurance bills and all the rest of that.
Yeah.
So there are plenty of Amish now who have jobs that are outside, what they call working away. Not in the community when they work. They maybe have something very little to do with the community. After all, I don't think there are many Amish that own an RV.
Yeah.
So that's something that intercourse with the outside world. And they take from it what they need, which is the job and the salary and all of that. They don't take the health insurance, by the way, unless they're forced to, by being if they're not baptized in the sect, they are forced to take the health insurance. If they are, then they don't have to do that. So what happens is when you have people who are not totally involved in farming and ancillary industries, is you begin to have more interchange with the outside world and more desires. I mean, you've got the guy and what has he got in his lunch pail? It may be very different from yours. Or what's he going to do with it when he cashes his paycheck on Friday night? Is he going to the movies? Is he going bowling? Is he going to get in the car with a bunch of friends and drive 200 miles to go to a rock concert? These are things you may not ever have thought about doing.
Yeah.
But the guy who does the job next to you is doing them. And, there's sort of a natural interchange there to find out about that kind of stuff. What I've said eventually is that the Amish are going to become more like the Orthodox Jews in our cities, who have a very distinct religious understanding of the world and way of interacting with it, but it's all internal. I mean, in addition to the garb that they wear and some of the things that they do, but that their internal religiosity does not depend on where they are.
Yeah.
The Amish certainly have a great affinity for that kind of religiosity and intensity of personal experience with God, and I think it's transferable and will go elsewhere. They feel very strongly that there's a strong link to the earth that they need, and I can't disagree with that, but I just say in future generations it's not going to be available to everybody in this section.
Yeah.
Or it will be available in less measure. I mean, it's one thing to live on what they call a farmette, which might be 5 acres or something where you've got a cow and a horse, maybe a few chickens and things like that, and then you can take care of that. Then living on a farm of 40 acres where you are actively involved in farming all the time. So it's a very different experience.
What do these Amish communities feel about the English communities that surround them, and they end up making so much money off of them and exploiting them and, selling Amish materials and merchandise and that kind of bric-a-brac? Is there resentment
there's some resentment, but on the other hand, it also brings them income as well. The tourist industries, they benefit them in terms of jobs and making items for them and serving them in restaurants and that kind of stuff too. So they can't have it both ways. If they want to be isolated and they want to build a wall around themselves, they could do that, but that has never been their way. They want to be interpenetrated with the outside world and maintain themselves individually as different. They don't want to be insular. It's not a monastery. There are no gates on their communities. Now, this is a very important thing. So therefore, what we're really talking about is in the head, right? They've got to have it inside and in their head. This is how they are. This is how they live. And, if somebody comes up to them and asks a dumb question, they'll give a straightforward answer. They may resent it a little bit, but they still understand it. And in a certain sense, they've always believed that they are models for how man should exist in God's world. And that if people are looking at them, they may look at them as curious and strange, but they're also seeing that there's a tremendous integrity to what it is that they are and how they do with things. And that is not wrong in Amish terms. It's not a question of their taking pride in it. It's a question of their obeying God's dictates as they see them, and therefore they're held up as examples of how people ought to live.
One of the interesting trends that you point out in the book that I had never even thought of or heard of was this high number of genetic diseases that are occurring in the Amish culture, just because of the small communities and sort of the interbreeding that goes on there, because there's only so many people in some of these communities.
Right. Well, there are no diseases that are only Amish.
Yeah.
What you find is that these are diseases that that occur in all communities, but because the Amish have intermarried, there are more instances there, and since they communicate with one another, they'll know about it, and so some physicians who study these things are able to get better samples simply because there are more people in one place.
Yeah.
And some of these diseases are very, very debilitating, but they'd be debilitating to anyone who had them, whether they're within the community or not. We just happen to know more about them with the Amish because they seem to be in a cluster. And it's not a cluster that's, produced by radiation or produced by weird intermatings or things like that. It's a normal occurrence. Okay, if it's a 1 in a million occurrence, fine, but you can find more of them in the Amish community because of the intermarriage. That's all.
Yeah.
It's a problem because, we can do genetic testing before we get married, and if there's a real problem, we may be able to identify it, and we may be able to decide whether this is either a deterrent to marriage or a deterrent to having children, or if there's some other way to deal with it. The Amish are not going to do that. They have a hard enough time finding a suitable mate. So they're not going to look into the future. They're saying, whatever will be, that whatever it is God's will, and we'll deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that they disdain modern medicine. They don't at all. And they've even allowed themselves to be vaccinated because they say, well, God invented vaccines too. So it's not a question of mankind doing something that's against God's will. But if you come out with a child who has a severe or who looks severely damaged because of the disease, we're not going to throw that child away. We're not going to shut him or her up behind bars. We're going to devote our lives to taking care of them in the best way we can.
Yeah. And at the end of the book, you give a pretty good idea of what you think Rumspringa will be like in 50 years. So talk about that and how you see this rite of passage evolving as the generations go on.
Well, first of all, Rumspringa is something that we probably all go through in one way or another. We may not call it that. It's sort of more identified by the Amish, more specific for them. I think that the Amish are going to have to evolve, as we were talking about before, because they're going to be less tied to the land. But there's always going to be a rite of passage. Either you have children brought up inside a community. They've got to go out and get some of the outside work. As long as they believe in the Anabaptist Creed, which I don't see anybody giving up, then we're going to have something like this. Intellectually speaking, it's not a bad idea that if you're going to join a religious group, that you do so as an adult.
Yeah.
That somebody makes an independent decision. So I think this is a very interesting thing, and that portion of it will go on. Exactly what form Rumspringa will take, or whether there'll be any limits to it or something, I have no idea. But it's a social practice. It's not part of the religious rites at all. It differs from place to place. The less rural the place, the more the active the Rumspringa. In the newer Amish communities, the ones that are pretty far out, you have people saying, oh, no, I'm not letting my kid go out and do that. But in the older communities, they do.
And you did raise the point in the book that maybe in the future, Rumspringa will sort of take the form where these kids might end up going to college or doing something,
Yeah, I have argued to my friends in the Amish community that education is not as dangerous as they think it is. That there are certain kinds of education that they could allow their children to have, which would benefit the community. I mean, they could use their own accountants.
Yeah.
I don't know about their own lawyers. That may be a little difficult. Because of the way that they're aspected of how they interact with the world, which is in a largely non-adversarial way, and we have an adversarial legal system.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that's appropriate. But they're always having to use outside accountants for their businesses, some of which are complicated. I mean, how about a dental hygienist or some certain forms of healthcare personnel, midwives, for example. I mean, they have great need for people to perform those services within the communities, and there are outsiders who currently do that. And my argument to them is that this is a perfectly reasonable skill to bring back into the community, which means you must allow your children to get this kind of experience, and that your shall we say loss rate won't go up appreciably if you do that.
Yeah.
And I think when you as an outsider or I as an outsider try and deal with things like this, these are suggestions that have to be made not only gently but within the context of what you understand their goals to be. They're coming to formulations like this themselves. I'm not the first person to have said this to them, nor am I the and it's been said by insiders as well.
When you talk to your friends like that, do they usually? What's their reaction usually?
Well, you're like, I'm not telling you what to do. I mean,
yeah.
They certainly quite understand that. I'm saying, well, we understand even as outsiders. I may have more experience being around Amish communities than some of them do because they may not have moved very far or seen very many different ones.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the same experience because it's not an insider's view, it's an outsider's view. Knowing what I do know about specialized education scenarios, and also what it is that the Amish want from an education, it's just not totally incompatible. So my guess is that they'll come to things like that sooner, if not later.
Did you check out the Amish in the City program or some of this other?
Yeah, it was a problem for me because I was out interviewing at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the people that had done the program, and I cringed at it. The problem is it feels very exploitative.
Yeah.
And it's also not an honest reflection of what the Springer experience is in the community, and that's problematic in terms of everybody else understanding what goes on. I mean, not everybody in the world lives like Paris Hilton. I mean, it's just not that way, and we don't want that to be the emblem of what the United States is and how young people of our age act in the world. I mean, it's interesting, but it's certainly not the way the rest of us live. So if we want people to understand the Amish community and to be sensitive to that and to get out of it what they can in terms of how is it relevant to your own life, so a program like Amish in the City is very tough because it creates an impression that's not real. Yeah,
it seemed like that. And where can people pick up Rumspringa? Where can they get it? I found it.
Well, it's now out in paperback.
Yep.
And it's been the basis of a number of book club discussions and things like that. It's very good for starting discussions, among other things. I mean, it's a good introduction to life among the Amish. And after all, Rumspringa, as I said, is a kind of a process that we all go through, whether formally or not. And it's sort of interesting to see it done in a semi-formal way and in a way where the kids are exposed to things that they've never been exposed to before. We've all gone through this experience, but in a slightly different manner.
Yeah, like I said, it was a fascinating book. I really enjoyed it a lot. And chances are people can pick it up just about any bookstore, because I found mine at
yeah, you can, and certainly
Amazon.
On the online stores as well.
Yeah.
I'm going to be out at the oldest bookstore in the country, the Moravian Bookstore in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, in May, talking about it. The book continues to sell well, and we're delighted about that.
Nice. And what was the reception like to the book in the Amish community? Have you heard much from them about it?
Well, I wouldn't call it a deafening silence. It's just that I didn't expect them to comment much about it. I know from the people that have read it, who have knowledge of the subject, and from the book inside and out, that it's an honest depiction of things, and it's reflective of what the reality is. That's what I want.
Yeah. And I guess just talk a little bit about some of your other books, plug away here on some of your other stuff.
What's coming up, we have a book called The 40 Years' War, which will come out in November. And this is a book about the last 40 years of foreign affairs in the United States, and it ties what was going on in the Nixon era to what's going on today in getting us into Iraq. The title of The 40 Years' War. The subtitle is The Neocon Ascendancy from Nixon's Fall to the Invasion of Iraq. want to tell you too much more about it. My co-author is Len Kolodny, who's the primary author of the famous book Silent Coup. He's had a revisionist Watergate history, long suppressed, still very much around and affecting how people perceive that.
Nice. And that's coming out in November?
We hope, yes. It's in the catalog for November, so we're hoping to get it out then.
Awesome. Well, Tom, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. Your book is it's got a lot of serious mainstream coverage, and on a personal level, I appreciate you coming on our little rinky-dink radio program to talk about it. When you get a review excerpt from People on the front cover, you're hitting the mainstream. So I appreciate that you'd come on our show to talk about the book. And I can't put it over enough. Rumspringa, To Be or Not to Be Amish. Fascinating stuff. Not only personal profiles of some of these kids going through Rumspringa, but also looking at the Amish religion and Amish community from a number.
I think there's one other thing that I would like to say.
Sure.
One of the best qualities about the book is its first-person account.
Yeah.
These are kids who are talking, and you hear them saying it, or actually just read them saying it in their own words, and then rather than all in my interpretation of it. And I think this is a very great strength, because very often in things that are written about the Amish, they're not quoted directly.
All right, there you go. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're getting the first-person perspective on these kids, what they're going through, what they're thinking of as they go through Rumspringa. It's really an eye-opening book and a fascinating story. Like I said, Tom, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. I highly recommend the book to anybody listening on the program. Like I said, I can't put it over enough. It was a fantastic read, and had a great conversation with you here today.
Well, thanks very much for having me.
That does it for this week's edition of BOA Audio Season 3. Huge thanks to Tom Shackman for coming on the show to enlighten us to the world of the Amish. You can find out more on Tom Shackman and how to pick up the book Rumspringa, To Be or Not to Be Amish, at the website www.tomshackman.com, TOMSHACHTMAN.com. Check it out. Moving right along, this would be the time for BOA Audio listener feedback, but we are so over the deadline this week that I want to wrap it up and get the episode out to you folks as fast as possible. The listener feedback is piling up. I'll try and get to some on the next edition of BOA Audio. If you want to shoot me your comments, questions, and feedback on the program, there's 3 ways to do it. Either write to boaaudio@hotmail.com or go to binnallofamerica.com and click the contact button. And the third way, of course, is to join the BOA forum, theusofe.com, theusofe.com. All 3 of those methods are surefire ways to get your thoughts into the hands of myself and the outstanding BOA staff. Speaking of which, it's time now, of course, for the thanks portion of the show. Leslie, Chiron, R. Lee, Joe V., Tina Senna, and Rochelle Hawks, the infamous and esteemed BOA staff. I can't thank them enough for their help and support with the audio series and the website. As I've said time in and time out here on the program, if you're only listening to BOA Audio and you're not reading the columns at binnallofamerica.com, you're only getting half the story. Go to BOA, check out the columns by the BOA staff, an ever-growing archive of esoteric opinion. Here now in the outro part of the show is where we ask you for donations. How do you donate to BOA? That's simple. You go to binnallofamerica.com and click the golden PayPal button. You'll see it right when you get to the index page or the BOA Audio archive page. Click that, go to PayPal, make a donation. No donation is too small, and all donations go towards keeping BOA Audio and binnallofamerica.com up and running and freely available. Next week and the week after, there will be no BOA Audio. It's time for our spring break. Usually in April, I like to take a couple weeks off, try and recharge my batteries here, enjoy the springtime a little bit, and line up the final batch of folks for the season. And that's pretty much what we have on our agenda. I've already got feelers out to some folks. I'm already kind of working on future episodes. Looking at finishing up the season at about 30 episodes, so we really only got about 9 slots left here on Season 3. And they're filling up fast, but we got to tape them, and I need a little time here to recharge my batteries. We're looking at either April 26th or May 3rd for the return of BOA Audio Season 3. episode number 22 of the season will roll out on one of those 2 dates. Stay tuned to BOA for details as April unfolds. And on that note, we're going to close it out here for the week. Thank you so much for listening, folks. I want to apologize again for the technical difficulties and the somewhat lengthy delay on the program, but I'm happy to have it out, and I'm kind of happy to get on with my little spring break from the show. I've definitely been burning the candles at both ends for the last month or so. Until next time, this is Tim Binnall, thanking you for listening and signing off.